Good afternoon to all our viewers. Good evening, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased today to be introducing a new Plough author, Esther Maria Magnis, who is joining us from southwestern Germany. Esther is a journalist and lives there with her husband and children. And her book, which was originally written in German, has been translated and published this week in English as With or Without Me, a memoir of losing and finding, beautifully translated into English by Alta L. Price. And I think you all are in for a real treat. Esther will be sharing a bit of her own story. The book is very personal. It's also poetic and philosophical and tackles a really tough issue, which many of us have faced and all of us will face in our lives. What happens to our faith when a loved one gets sick and dies? And I know many of you are joining us today because you are either in a situation like that or you know somebody who is. And we do hope that you're able also after this talk to share a link with some who might have missed it. There'll be an opportunity later for the speakers to take your questions. So please post any questions you have in the YouTube chat, and they hope to get to some of those at the end of the hour. Hosting our conversation will be Dr. Lydia Dugdale, who is a practicing medical doctor as well as an ethicist for Columbia University Medical Center. So she is dealing with these questions on a daily basis with her patients and hospital staff. So without further ado, Lydia, I'd like to hand this over to you and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And welcome to Esther. We are so thrilled to be able to have this conversation today and really to celebrate the long overdue publication of your book in English. This book is incredible, actually. I have my copy here full of sticky notes because I hope to even read a few of the quotations from the book as we work through our conversation today. For any listener on the call who is inclined to think about what matters in life, to think or question the existence of God, to think about suffering, to think about those strange moments when you're quite sure that there is something more than the material world. For someone who loves to have someone else say what they're thinking, but they themselves don't want to say it, Esther's book really does all of these things. It's incredible. It is one of the best books I've read. And so I could not commend it more highly. And that's why I'm so delighted and honored to be able to have a chat with Esther today. So thank you for joining us from Germany.
Thank you, Lydia, so much. Yeah.
Pleasure. So I just want to start with the question that authors always get asked, but I think it's a really important question. Why did you do this? Why did you write this book? Why did you tell your story the way you did?
Yeah, it wasn't my idea at the beginning. I don't know why I have to say this, but I always excuse myself like this because I didn't feel to be on a mission, to talk about my faith or anything. But I worked as a journalist already during my studies, and then I published an essay. And one day, I got a letter from a huge German publishing house, from the head of the publishing house, and he wrote something like he liked the voice, and he and if I would think about if I would consider writing a book that they could publish, and I was shocked. I didn't really know what to say, and at the same time, suddenly an agency, how do you say, an agency who helps writers to public books. Mm-hmm. They started to call me because they read this essay, and then they said something like, it's something very funny. they said after they called me for the second time, well, Esther, it's people bring their books to us. They send their manuscripts to us in order that we help them. And it's a very strange thing for me to say now, but you should be really happy that we are calling you. And then I was even more confused, but also very flattered. And I thought, okay, maybe I should do this. I was at the end of my studies. And so I started immediately after university, I started to write the book. I signed the contract, and then they gave me the freedom to play a little, to find out, because I did not know what to write about. And then I played a little, this is how you find out what your topic is. And then I noticed very soon that it's going to be about the God question. So the question, is there a God? And the God question also in the face of suffering. And that's how it started to grow. And then I noticed I can't talk about it, or I can't write about it theoretically. I mean, I could, but I noticed that it's not possible to get into the depth of the question if you just play with it in your mind, So I noticed I'll have to tell what I know and how I experienced it. And that's how I started to write the book. But I didn't like the idea at the beginning to talk about me or to tell parts of my life. And I had to do it, so I did it.
Well, you do it so well. It's very brave to tell so much about yourself. Really brave. And that's one of the things that I love about the book, is you have this honesty in your speech that is so raw. There's nothing about it that has been modified to be polite. It's and that enables the reader to connect with you as a real person. And so I love the way you take that same honesty, that raw honesty, and talk about these different experiences with God. And when you were young, you sort of had this sense that God is real, that God is there. I'm going to read this one. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs here from the very beginning of the book. You wrote, actually, I'll tell you, I read this to my 12-year-old daughter when I was preparing this. And I said, in a few years, you need to read this book, but just listen to what she says. And this is what Esther says. Actually, I liked God. I often found him boring in church, but aside from that, I found him fundamentally intriguing. There seemed to be something insane about him, and also something gentle. He was clearly fond of John, who ran around the desert half naked like some exhibitionist, covered only partially by camel hide, yelling his lungs out and munching on locusts. And he seemed to like that revoltingly crazy possessed man who was totally out of his mind. He even spoke with the devil. He gave orders to the sea, and he bled on the cross from his head and his back, and he was covered in filth and welts. He seemed pretty wild. But then at other times, I got the feeling that he wore glasses, knotted his hair into a bun, had a long beard, and stared dead ahead, empty-eyed. But then those moments passed and I squirreled them away in my memory, but they didn't override my interest in him or my attention. Because as a kid, I mostly just found him extraordinarily beautiful and extraordinarily friendly and weird. I just love that. There's something that it gets to the heart of what so many of us think. Who is this beautiful, incredible, powerful God who delights in crazy people or delights in things that seem strange or absurd to us, but is also wonderfully loving and inviting. And so I wonder, this was your sort of perception as a child. And I know you have children, I have children. Do you think that most children see God as intriguing and beautiful and friendly and maybe a little weird? Do you think that people are born to imagine that someone bigger and more loving exists inside and outside the world and wants to know us? Were you a typical child, or was this an unusual sense of God?
I don't know. I think I don't know how all children feel, but I think if you allow children to talk about their thoughts they have about God, you will hear that some of them, I mean, I even felt repelled somehow. It was, even more than that. I just thought he's strange. I felt, for example, repelled that he told that he looked at the humans and didn't like them anymore and wanted to send this huge flood and to kill everybody, because that was just a way of acting that my little brother would have done, if a toy doesn't act the way he likes it. And so you're really, I don't know if you can say that in English, disturbed and confused as well as a child. And I think it's, if you allow children to, if you tell children the story, that they can just say how they think about it, and that they don't, and I tell my children, you don't need to like him. You don't need to like every story. So you just hear it and then you see what it does, and if you understand it. But I think that you have what I think many children have the ability or the sense, because it's something that humans have very often, for situations of the pure being. Because you were asking if I think that children feel that there is something bigger behind everything, and I think that I remember, for example, when I was a child, that I had these moments of total peace. I experienced them. I remember lying in the polo shirt of my father, at the beach. I was supposed to sleep in that shirt. I must have been really small because the shirt was so big that it covered my face. And I saw the little light dots through the woven fabric, and I felt the warm sand, and I heard the wind and the waves and so on. And then I had this moment of silence, and you felt the pureness of being, just being alive. And these moments are very deep and very strange. And I think it's a question of culture. If you give them space, and if you allow children to examine them, to get deeper into it, and to take it really seriously that you experience something here, because it's the absolute now that you experience in moments like this. And it's very funny because there is one thing in the book that was almost impossible to translate into English, because in German there is, I have the feeling that the German language has a knowledge of God in its language, in this in a certain, how do you say, in a certain word. Because if you say in German, if you want to say that something is now happening now, you would call it Gegenwart. It is the Gegenwart. It is the presence, and that means Gegenwart means two things. It means in English present, the present, the here and now, and presence at the same time. And I think this is something, and it's really nice because in German, if you say in German the word that something is present, that something is happening now, it is defined by, I think, God's presence, So there's only something here happening because it happens in front of somebody. And you can't say here and now without talking about God at the same time. And this is something I think many children and grown-ups experience or can experience, and yeah, I think it's lovely if you give people, or if you cultivate moments like this, because they will guide you much further, because they are so amazing and beautiful.
Do you try to cultivate moments with your own children like that?
Yeah, I started to pray like this again, to be very quiet, and I try to not to, it's very difficult. I try not to think, and that's almost impossible, right? Because you always have this talking voice in your head that drives you crazy, and you just, if you find the moment when one thought is going down or is fading, and the second before the other starts, this is what I tell my children, that's a beautiful place. You should try to, be in this place for a second. And this is how I pray, and I do this sometimes with them too in the evening, because otherwise the praying of children becomes very quickly the way of praying, please God, give me a lollipop or something like that.
Yeah. So I love the story that you tell when you were with your family in Spain that night on the beach, and you sort of, excuse yourself from the dinner table and go down to the beach, and you describe hearing your name called. Someone is calling your name, but it's not someone at the dinner table or in the restaurant. It's coming kind of from inside, from within. And you write, the sort of the calling had a gravity that was loving and at the same time absolute, unconditional. Not the way an adult might look at a child. And in its lingering gaze, there was something indescribable, something heartening that gave me the feeling I had to take myself seriously, a knowledge of myself that I couldn't fathom, encouraging and at the same time approving, authorizing. I was so astonished that I have no idea how long I sat there. And then all of a sudden I was pretty sure and burst out, "You're God?" Thinking, that's God? That's what adults mean when they talk about him? And because I found his devotion and affection so touching, I raised my hand from the warm rock and gave him a little wave. And because I felt so grateful, I decided to give him a little gift. I stood up on the rock and composed a prayer. That I just love that, seeing you as a little girl sitting on the rock at the beach, having this experience of the divine and being so overwhelmed that you have to wave at God and compose a prayer. Here's my question though. How did you know it was God? How did you know it was God?
Yeah, I wasn't certain, but I was very certain that it must have been the thing that the grown-ups would call God. And I thought it was God because it was so incredible huge. It was, on the one hand, it was the most intimate encounter, and on the other hand, it was so incredible. It was so, the size was so huge, or it felt like it was coming from so far, although it was within me, happening within me, but it was from far away. It's really difficult to talk about it, but it felt like the mind that lies over the Alps or the sea, like the oldest knowledge. It's really difficult to describe it in another way than I tried in the book, So,
yeah, that's amazing. That's one thing that you're so good at. You're so good at trying to characterize your experiences of God, trying to give it language. It's something I really appreciate. And that's what gives the book its poetic quality. You're always searching for language to describe the indescribable, right? Because ultimately God is beyond any descriptions that we give. And yet you're constantly playing with language to be able to say what you've experienced of the divine. So we've talked about the early years, but it wasn't always that way, right? Your life has not been filled with these moments on the beach. And so you talk later in the book about when you were about 13 or 14 years old, you slowly began to grow apart from God. And you write, it was simply a separation, no waving, no goodbyes. It was as if we were at the airport standing on one of those moving walkways. We were looking at each other, and then we were carried off in opposite directions without a word. Part of the reason you say you grew apart from God was because God grew small. You talk about how, the church in particular was guilty for this, but belief in God didn't ask for much. And in fact, people at church and good people in society didn't seem very different. Everyone was interested in sort of doing good, helping their neighbor, visiting the sick, working for peace. There wasn't anything that really made the church that different than good people anywhere. So why do you think that human beings, why is it important for us not to have a small view of God? Or why do we need to see God as great? Do we need to see God as great? Or is a small view of God enough? And then how does suffering play into this question of a big God versus a little God?
Yeah, I think to see God as great, you always have to accept that he might be somehow the way you don't like him, like there's so many, as I just said, that there are stories in the Bible that I just don't like, and I think he's always different than you like him. And if you talk about him, you have to, in the way you talk about him, I think you need to have an open, can you say flank? Open, or you need to have in mind that that you only can say what you understand. And if your understanding of God is little, then you make him small, And if you're in favor of one certain thing about God, like this, or about Jesus, like it's like a social idea or so on, it's nice, but it's only one thing that you are talking about. And so it's, that's why I think that's why for many people, it's so difficult to believe in God. If you talk to people who have a very narrow-minded picture of him, then it's really boring. It's like as if he lives in a suburb with a small garden, a fence, and a dog, and prejudices, and that's it. So then it's very, very narrow. And the suffering question is, I think I experienced both. I experienced that that suffering brought me closer, but I also experienced that it brought me far away from him. So and I what I wrote, or what I tried to examine in the book, was that that after my father died, I'm describing this, that my father died, and after that I broke with God. And and after I broke with him, this the question of, is there a God, suddenly turned into, if there is no God, why am I suffering from love, you know? Because if there is, because I broke with I didn't break only with God as a person or somebody else, I also broke with the idea. I noticed that I really tried to think atheistic and to live atheistic. And so I noticed, and I had no idea before, but I noticed that I was still sitting on the Jewish Christian branch of ideas, you know, that I was still, that my concept of truth, my concept of soul, of human beings, of my concept of, you know, ethics or good and evil or good and bad, were totally influenced or soaked in with this old European Jewish Christian concept of being. And so I really tried to break with that too. I tried to get this out of my thoughts, and it was very difficult, because if you try to get this out, if you try to throw out the whole invisible world, you know, like I didn't have a soul anymore, and I couldn't say anything was good or evil. So I came back to the point which I would call the you know, there is at the very beginning of the Bible, and after God created the first day, or after God created the day, he said, or it says, and God saw that it was good. And I lost all of these ideas, you know, I didn't feel inside of me that life is good. So, and there was no God anymore who said that life is good. And I didn't trust other people, because they were just happy. So they could say that life is good, but it wasn't for me. So I didn't believe them. And so I came into this, I think I overstepped backwards this sacred line of the first day, you know, into this void that was before this first judgment, that it was good, that it's good that we're here. So, and this is something that you can also do theoretically, but you shouldn't do it in reality. And that's what I experienced, that I was really insecure, and I was not able to say my name anymore, because I couldn't take it seriously. And I think that's the core of depression. If you suffer, but you don't, but it doesn't matter that you suffer, you know, it doesn't matter, but you still suffer. So you don't care about yourself anymore, but you're still the one who carries the suffering. So and yeah, you shouldn't overstep this line. So I did, and yeah, I'm hanging now. I forgot what I wanted to say.
Well, can I ask you a question about what you were just saying? Do you think that the experience of depression is different if you can still acknowledge the goodness of God?
No, I don't think so. I think it's as cruel, because the problem, if you have depressions, is, people who have depressions definitely know that you don't even care about the love of, I don't know, the person that you really love. It's painful that you just want them to, you feel sorry for them, that you are a burden for them. And so I think that this, even if God would have existed in my thoughts, I would have had another problem. I think it doesn't solve the problem. I'm not sure, but I think it brought me I mean, the question in the end is the one who has a depression right? Nothing matters? Or is he not right, you know? And I had the feeling with my with my concept of being, which was an incidence, you know, in the cosmos, that it didn't matter. And so the depression, or the whisper, or the voice of the depression in the end, is something that you have to say, okay, it is right. If there is a God, and if it's not, if it does matter that you're here, then the depression is wrong.
The clown that you describe in your book, who's always taunting you and whispering lies, is that the image you're using to describe your depression when you?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What did you want the clown to represent?
Yeah, that's very. I'm not sure. He just appeared while I was writing, and I think he is more the. He's more. I think he's opening up the question just with his being there, you know. And he doesn't. He's sort of indifferent. He doesn't really care, but he's there and represents the show of suffering in the world.
Hmm.
It touched me very much because in you know, we are very concerned and afraid and sad with the people in the Ukraine. We say Ukraine.
Ukraine.
And we have a comedian in Germany who said that for him it's crazy that the Ukrainian president is also is a clown like him. You know, his job before was being a clown, and that touched me very much when I heard that this clown now is. I mean, he's totally different from the idea of the clown I use in my book, but it's a comedian, or they called him clown in a very positive way, who is suffering now, you know, has to deal with this nightmare. Yeah,
no, it's an interesting image, and I'll just say for the viewers who haven't yet read your book that Esther pulls this conversation with a clown, these interactions with this clown throughout. It's kind of a thread that shows up once your world starts crashing round about you. And the first time I read it, I had to go back and reread that chapter. I thought, what just happened? Like, what am I reading? How did I get here? And so I have been curious about what you intended by pulling this idea through. It's interesting that the imagery appeared as you were writing. That this wasn't, I mean, was this something you would have been able to describe to someone before when you were in your depression and doubting God? Would you have said it's like a clown, or did that image came up completely as you were writing?
Yeah, it was while I was writing.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes, it happens very often that you write things that you don't really understand, but you know that it's true, or that you need to write it that way. And for me also the chapters, that was something very interesting, because I didn't really know why I put the color names over the chapters. You know, it's red, black, and white, like white is snow, and black, like, what is the name?
Ebony. Yeah.
Ebony. And it was very interesting for me to hear the German, on a German radio station, they were talking about, you know, they have this they have a show where they talk about novels and books, and they represented the book, and they were talking about this question, and why I put these names over the chapters. And he said something very interesting. I haven't thought about it, but he said that it's the names of, you know, Snow White, the story, the German fairy tale.
Mhm.
And he says that the reason why, he says the first chapter is red as blood. It's the, the strength of the youth, and then comes white as snow when my father dies and I break with God, and I fall into this total silence, and examine the way of losing reality, because that's what happened. I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't say my name anymore because and then in the end it turns, the last chapter is called Black as Ebony, you said, and so he said it gives it's the ebony in the fairy tale is the frame on which the queen is sitting at the beginning. And so he says it's the frame in the end, or the that gives the story, I don't know, that gives reality a frame again, when I turn back to God, which always sounds very simple and easy if I say then I turn back to God, but it's very difficult to describe the switch from atheism to faith again.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I had been wondering about that as well. That's helpful. So a preview for those who will read your book now to look out for the red, the white as snow, and the black as ebony. I just want to read the very short paragraph. You were you met your sister at the hospital to visit your father, and this is after chemotherapy had failed, and your parents had traveled all over to try to find treatments. Sounds like they were well connected and did everything they could to try to defeat the cancer. And you and your sister went out to your mother's Volkswagen Golf for a chat. It was a cold day and you were smoking cigarettes. By the way, I'm a medical doctor. Have you stopped smoking?
I have.
Okay, well done.
But I smoked so much, and I still love to smell it. I always tell my friends, please smoke into my face. Yeah, but I did quit years ago. It was very
good for you.
Yeah.
I approve. So you're sitting out there, your sister's complaining because you're smoking cigarettes. I have no idea what your mother must have thought. I can't imagine she was happy that you were smoking in her car.
Yes.
But your sister and you start talking again about faith in God, and you decide, we can invoke this this verse about believing the mountains will rise up and be cast into the sea. If we can believe that, then God can heal Dad. And then your father dies. And this is what you write. And 6 months later, my wailing echoed throughout the hospital, and I felt I was going insane, that I had to tear the skin off my face as my father lay dead in front of me. After that, a silence enveloped the whole world. It was quiet and cold, just like after snow had fallen. No God, no me, no emotions. And that's, helps to set us up for this white as snow section of the book, where you do describe this long period of silence and inability to say your own name. And so I wonder, reading your book, one can't help but think of friends and loved ones who have had similar experiences, maybe oneself. What would you say to someone who has suffered greatly and lost faith? You're very compassionate toward atheists. You say a couple of times, there are many good reasons not to believe.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like you were comfortable staying in the space of unbelief. You had to come back to belief. And so I just wonder how you would advise someone else, or what words you would say to somebody else?
In order to believe, or in
About
somebody who suffers, you mean?
yeah, so for someone who has suffered so greatly and also lost faith, would you say, fine, like stay there, maybe one day it will come back? Or what would you encourage people to do? Or would you say, God will show up again, just wait? I mean, can we give people hope who are suffering so profoundly?
I think if somebody would really honestly ask me and really would want to know, I would say that maybe you have to follow. There's, I think, two paths of suffering. So there's the one you suffer from the loss. If somebody dies, and you need to be so brave to stay with this feeling, not to run away from grieving and so on. So you have to grieve for the one you lose, and you have to grieve for your faith too, I think. So I would say, I think you have to, it's not done yet, you also have to go that path too, because if you believed in God before, it's not only God is, if God was not just an idea, but you already had a relationship with this, like I tried to describe it at the beginning, with this unknown, this back and forth of love and hope, and the trying to get closer to maybe Christ or whatever, then after you lost somebody that you loved, and after you break with God, or after you lose your faith, you have to grieve that you lost your faith. Mm-hmm. And I think you really have to let go your faith, because usually that's what I experience very often, because I still have, it's very easy for me to, many of my friends are atheistic, and it's very easy for me to still think atheistic, because I really worked on it after I broke with God, and I was pretty consequent with my thoughts and my concept, and I didn't allow anything else into my world after I broke with God. That it had to be real, it was not supposed to be any illusion or anything that I would want to believe or whatever, but I needed reality. So if you lose faith, and then usually you have to be sad about it, and you have to let it go too. But maybe if you can, you should do it. But that's, I don't know, I feel very bad to tell people what to do. But that's what I did, is you give it away with in a way of praying, because your old faith, the old faith is not carrying you anymore. You had maybe another idea of God, but if you just turn your back, then it's difficult. I think it's always very sad for humans if they don't stay open for something more. And I think if you turn off the idea that there might be a God, then you just get narrow. It just gets narrow and boring. It's just really not, I don't find it very intelligent to not open up to the possibility of that there might be a reason. And if you find God very small and stupid and boring, then it's really the picture that you have of God. It's not what he is, because and so what I would tell somebody, I told my cousin, for example, because he really had problems with God after my brother died. I told him, maybe you have to, he said, I lost almost everything. And I said, maybe you have to let go the last bit. And, because that's how I experienced that in the lowest moment, in the nothing, something new erased. Can you say that? Erased?
Rises, yeah, something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Something new grew. But you should do it with maybe if you have with the last power or the last strength that you have for grieving, you have to give it away sadly. If you just turn your back, then it doesn't. I think it's difficult. But if you stay open for being sad and grief, and because the problem of this question, why allows God suffering, is, as I said, you can talk about it theoretically, but in the end, it's a question of relationship, and it can only be healed in relation to God. And what I would always do is really tell him everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, it's very hard if I read my book sometimes, because I really hated him so much. Mm-hmm. And that I told him that, but you really have to tell everything. You can't, I think this is the only way. But
it's interesting because on the one hand, your father dies and you say, it was complete silence, no God, no me, no emotion. And yet coming through that silence, you start to talk again to God, right? So if I hear you correctly, what you're asking people to do is to not stop the conversation. If you're angry at God, tell God you're angry. If you hate God, tell God you hate him. If you can't believe, tell God you can't believe, but don't close the door.
Yeah, I mean, you can, but I don't know. I didn't. Yeah.
Well, but closing the door. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't do it anymore. I have phases in my life now very often that I really, there's nothing, no belief or no faith left in me. Very often I have moments I don't believe in God anymore. And this is horrible for me. I hate these phases when I have them, but for myself, I know that I don't want to overstep this border again. I don't want to step, there is a line which I know if I overstep it, then everything that we call beautiful or true or good is just something that we create in ourselves. And it's because it's just the question, which group of humans win in the end, because that's the truth then. If it's just the survival of the fittest truth, or of the fittest how you say of what people, the group of people that is stronger than tells you what is good. It defines the ethics and everything. Right. And I think it's just very difficult to talk about something is right or wrong or good or evil if you don't accept that there might be, per se, as I said, this first judgment. It is good that human beings, it's good that we're here, it's good that we exist, or it's good that life is. If you step behind this judgment, which can't come from a group of people, maybe it can. I can think about it in an atheistic way that kind of works, but it's not filled with blood in the end. It's not filled with reality then. It's, again, just a theory, just a game, I think. So, yeah.
I want to invite anyone who's listening to put questions in the chat, and we can, in our last few minutes, ask those questions. One listener wanted to clarify the German word for awareness of the presence of God. And is that Gegenwart?
Yeah.
That's the word you were going for. Somebody put it in the chat. I don't know German, so, but that's the word you were going for. I think somebody spelled it out in the chat.
Yeah.
And then another listener commented just on the things that we must go through for God to lead us from unbelief to surrender. And she writes, the beautiful thing is that he is walking with us through it all, even in the silence. And I would ask you, based on that comment, now looking back, do you believe that God was always walking with you, even when it was silent?
I think yes. Yeah. But I think I'm also fascinated by the idea of how free you are, how free we are to allow him to have a relationship with us or not. And to, yeah. So I think, yeah, that's why I have difficulties. Like when you asked me before, I really have difficulties what I would tell people what they should do, because it's, if you cultivate life where you just try to stay open towards the world, other people, and like other opinions and also God, to the thing that you don't understand, but you just hope, and you have to stay open to yourself, to allow yourself that there might be to think that there might be a reason that you hope, or that you suffer from love. So love might be a reality, not just chemistry, but a reality that is demanding something. And just I think it's always very sad if people stop being curious, and it's very difficult to stay curious if you suffered, but you have to, otherwise you're very old and everything is boring. So yeah.
There's a question, how does someone with a diagnosis encourage the faith of loved ones? And so, I mean, maybe a different way to ask that is, how did your father and your brother, both of whom died of cancer, how did they encourage your faith? Or how would you say someone who's been diagnosed with a terrible disease could encourage the faith of those around them?
My brother he didn't intend to, but it was the way he was present that I can't really describe it. It's really the way he was there, was just the way he was praying. He was totally himself. And like one of these moments that I've tried to describe, when I was experienced as a child, when I was lying under the polo shirt of my father and hearing the waves and experience this pure being. And you could say that my brother was like this all of the time. It was just, and that's something I find very interesting, that a person can be totally here, and although he was going already, although his body was more and more getting weak and so on, his presence was really huge, if you can say that, or strong. And so I think you encourage just if you take care for yourself and your relationship with God. I think this really helps. It did help me. My brother was, he was very young. I was very young. I was not a great help for him, and we were also fighting and telling us, you know, we were always totally honest, or as honest as you can be. And so he was just himself, and he prayed, and that helped me. I knew that he had his own relationship with, God.
So there are a few questions people are interested in, sort of how you came back to God. Did that occur quickly, or did it take a while? And then a sort of a related question, but I think a good one that I have had also, is when you talked about sort of letting the old relationship with God, your old experience of faith go, you broke with God, that wasn't working, it wasn't sustaining you. When you came back to God, is that a completely new understanding of your relationship with God? Or is it building on the old? I don't know. I'm just curious to hear how you would characterize that.
I think it's connected to what you read from the book, to this experiences that you can make as a child, or that I had as a child, like his do you say greatness?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that changed a little bit. That he was, when I was small, I experienced all these things that they did not come together. As I told you, there was this story from the Bible that repelled me about, and also the story about Abraham and,
Isaac.
Yeah. And then there were other stories that I really loved and I really liked. For example, the story with the baby Moses, who was, swimming on the water, and then all these beautiful women bathing. And I just loved this story very much. And where God was so, you had the feeling that the shining water was already the care that God took for this little baby. He was swimming on it. It was very easy and light and so on. And so I didn't bring this all together. And I think I as a child, and one day maybe I decided that I believed more in, I prayed like, okay, please God do this, please God do that. And I got a little bit more away from that after my father died. I was just accepting his godness, that he was God. And I noticed that I have no clue. I don't understand. He might be I know it's, on the one hand, it's a bad thing, but I even thought he might be in a way that I wouldn't like, even that might be possible. And when I was studying, I read this Jewish philosopher. I don't know if he's famous in the USA. It's I want to say Viktor Frankl, but it's not him. It's another one. Hans Jonas.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know him? Yeah, you might. Yeah. And he wrote the concept of God after Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
And I read this book, and he says very, if I how do you say, cook it down to one thing, then he says that after Auschwitz, you can't bring the three things together anymore that we say God is. You would say, usually you say God is good, he's almighty, and he's understandable because he told his people what he wants and what he doesn't want. So, and you have these three things that come together. And after Auschwitz, if he's understandable and if he's good, he can't be almighty. So one has to go out. If he's almighty and good, you just can't understand why he didn't do anything in Auschwitz. And if he is what did I not bring together? If he's good and no, if he's good and if he's almighty and understandable, he's just not good.
Yeah.
So, and he decides that it must have been the way of you might have to skip, if you can say so, the almightiness. Maybe he's not almighty, and I experienced that. I understood what he said in a different way. I thought after I broke with God and I turned back, I thought, no, I just don't understand him very much. So I would rather not skip that, but say this is a little bit, something I noticed. So what happened was he became just very big after I turned to him again.
There are so many more questions that we don't have time for. We're at the top of the hour. I just really want to commend to everyone Esther's new book in English. I know people were wondering about the German version. You can Google her and find that online easily enough. Thank you, Esther, for writing this, for being vulnerable, willing to share your story. And I'm sure it will be a blessing to so many, as it has been to me. And I look forward to sharing this book with many people. So thank you. And thank you to Plough for hosting this. Have a good day. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Plough, too.
Thanks, Esther. Talk again.
Yes.